specifically on pathways, because I believe pathways relate very strongly to how we retain sailors. So we will go through those things. So elite racing, firstly, why is elite racing important to us? Now, when I talk elite racing, I'm not talking club championships. I'm talking national championships, world championships, Olympic Games, America's Cup, GP series, that sort of racing. So why is elite racing important to us? Firstly, funding. The government generally does not understand recreational sport. First world governments like the UK and the US are starting to put a lot more money into recreational sport and help understand competitive sport. Basically, Olympic medals is what they talk about. So if we want to get funding in the sport, we have to have at least a pathway and an idea towards elite racing. Then looking at the IOC gets 99% of its funds out of the Olympic Games and the action of the Olympic Games. And they then give a large percentage of that to the different international federations. So World Sailing would get a large amount of the money. The majority of money that makes World Sailing happen comes from the IOC. So if we don't follow an elite racing pathway, we don't get involved in the Olympic Games, we are not going to be funded out of the IOC because we won't be in the Olympics then. So from those two, very important funding wise. Then marketing, a lot of the elite competitions. So Volvo Ocean Race does a huge amount. I know it's no longer Volvo Ocean Race, it's now the Ocean Race, but the Volvo Ocean Race did a huge amount to take sailing to the general public, to show the general public what sailing is about. The America's Cup every year has success in showing the world of non-sailors what sailing's about. So if we did not have elite racing, we would not have that marketing. Of course, the Olympic Games is the big one, and that shows the sport a lot. There's also a certain sector of our community. A lot of people just want to race. They want to get involved in racing, and they want the carrot of the Olympic Games and elite competition that'll drag them on. So we need to cater for those people. It is a very small percentage of people that actually get to elite competition, but it is a carrot that draws a lot of people towards that competition. And then development of equipment. Equipment is primarily developed around the elite market, around the future of where we're going. So the America's Cup is a prime example. Foiling, the change in foiling, I won't say people foil because of the America's Cup, but the America's Cup caused a huge growth in the foiling market. So that is an example of how equipment develops. And in Olympic equipment, if we start looking at our top-end countries that are spending a lot of money, they do a huge amount of research on where pressure points are on the boat, how to get better sails, how to get better rigs, and so on. Elite racing is important, but elite racing, unfortunately, is also a reason that we lose a lot of athletes or potential athletes, because we put too much pressure on children at a young age because parents want to live their dream through their kids on various things like that. Or we create false hope in a kid's #1 in South Africa, but he's number 250 in the world, and then he thinks he's just the amazing sailor, but actually is not. So the pressure of elite racing very often is a negative thing that takes kids out of the sport, and even older people that have got into the sport and just can't handle the pressure of that elite racing and what it requires. So we need to have systems where we manage our athletes. There's two systems that stand out that are used around the world that I'll mention now, but any system where we are actually managing our athlete from start to that elite competition is good. We need to be thinking, if you winning the Optimist World Championships is not an important thing if you are looking at the bigger picture. If you're looking at someone going to the Olympic Games to win an Olympic medal, winning the Optimist World Championships means not that much. It's not going to be the make or break of their campaign. But so many athletes are destroyed because they overtrain for the Optimist World Championships, and we lose really talented people. I'm not going to go into these models in depth. You can go and Google them and have a look at what is out there. The first one is the Long-Term Athlete Development Program. In South Africa, we call it the Long-Term Participant Development Program. And SAS actually did a whole series of manuals and a lot of work on how to implement this plan with SASCOC. But the basis of long-term athlete development or long-term participant development is that we are looking at the development of the athlete from when they start sailing, and what age are they, and what do they need to learn at that stage. And then we slowly develop them through that. The first stage of where sailing is involved in, because of 5+ years old, is called the fundamental stage. So we're teaching the fundamental stage with the emphasis on fun. We're teaching fundamentals of how to handle their boat, how to round a marker buoy well, but without actually racing. So making fun activities that teach the fundamentals. Then we go into, after that lasts till 12 years old, then 12 to 15, I think it is. We go on to the learn to train phase, where you get a little bit more serious about the training, but still in both these levels, competition only plays a very small part. The international guidelines sort of talk about 20% competition in all we're doing. And I find in a lot of developing countries, the biggest mistake made is that the only training that happens is during competition, whether it be club champs or whether it be national championships or whatever. That is when people train. They don't get out and just learn to sail their boat and become one with their boat in normal life. So developing that fundamental stage and that learn to train phase, very important, so that we get the person to really understand what makes this boat happen and not worry about the actual racing process. Then we get to the train to train phase, so 15 to 19. In the train to train phase, we are looking at much more serious, a larger percentage of racing. I think it's up to 60% of racing, but still focusing on training each individual aspect of racing. What do I need to train on? Not just putting the whole race together. You are training individual parts and developing your athlete. And then you go on to train to compete, which is then at a higher level where you're training very seriously and are competing. Again, even your top athletes or Olympic athletes are spending a maximum of 80%, 60% in competition. There's absolute maximum. You'll probably find most of it is around 40% competition and 60% training. The other model, I haven't had a huge amount to do with this model, but Switzerland uses a combination of this and Australia uses this model. It's the FTEM framework, which is foundation, where similar to the long-term athlete development, they develop the foundation of the person, and they spend a lot of time working on just getting the person used to the boat, then moving on to talent, where they're developing the talent. So they are a bit more similar to the learn to train phase. They're looking at more developing that talent to a higher level. Then they go on to the elite phase, where you're at elite competition and how much you need to train for that. And the master is then training further. But both of these models end up with sailing for life or sport for life. So we need to be focusing on keeping people in the sport for life, not for now, not to win a medal, but keeping them sailing for life. That is the success of our sport, and we need to focus on that. Another area which isn't a huge problem in South Africa, but we need to keep it in mind, is post-performance management. In a lot of the countries where they've got high-level medalists who are training, it's basically they dedicate their lives totally to winning an Olympic medal, and all they eat, drink, and sleep is Olympic medals for 8 or 12 years, 8 years minimum, 12, 16 years even. Then suddenly they stop. They no longer are competing in the Olympics. What happens to them there? We find a lot of depression, and also people come out and the first few months they are managing to do public speaking and that sort of thing, and that keeps them involved. But when that drops off a little bit, where do they go there? A very small amount head into things like the Grand Prix Series and the America's Cup. But a lot of these athletes are suddenly not knowing where they're going. And we need to make sure that we manage our athletes that come out the top and have given their life to winning a medal for the country. And now what are they going to do? This leads on to developing the person. Everything said in this slide is to develop the person. We are not developing a medalist. We are not developing someone who is going to sail for life. We are developing a person who is going to live a life that has reward in it. Hopefully that reward can be an Olympic gold medal. Much more importantly to me at this stage, and I believe the heart of sailing in the world, is recreational sailing. Such a small percentage of people even sail at world championship level. If we look at what percentage of sailors from South Africa sail at world championship level, it is a very small amount. So this recreational sailor, that is the bulk of our sailors. And yet we don't spend time on thinking, how do we develop them? How do we make it attractive to them? In recreational sailing, I include club structured racing. So any club racing, that's recreational sailing. I enjoy racing. I don't enjoy getting into my boat and sailing across the bay. I want to be either ahead of someone preferably, or behind someone chasing them, trying to overtake them. That's my nature. And a lot of people are like that, especially a large percentage of our current sailors. So we need to cater for that. But we need to cater for it in a way that we're not trying to have Olympic competitions at our club. We are having enjoyable racing where people can come and enjoy their racing against each other. We need to realize this isn't the Olympic Games, it isn't the World Championships, it is our club racing. And people want to come there and enjoy it. I've been at some clubs that have got this right and they really do it well. And I've been at other clubs that just don't get it right, and they chase people away because they're so worried about the structured racing, and it needs to be perfect, and the race sequence has to be perfect, and we have to have a protest and all the rest of it. Then we look at cruising. So cruising, naturally we think of keelboats, and in South Africa I think this is an area that is very neglected and we maybe need to look a bit more into. But guys getting on their boats and sailing around the bay, sailing off wherever, and it doesn't have to be a yacht. It can be a dinghy. There's people who cruise in dinghies who just want to get into a boat and sail across the bay and sail back, or sail across the pond and sail back. That's what they want to do. And we need to encourage that. We need to be creating pathways to that and encouraging people just to get onto their boats and have a relaxed sail. Ideally, it should be with a few other people, because then it's more social activity and people enjoy it more. So then looking at traditional boats. Now here I'm talking about boats. We mustn't be looking at what boats people sail. We've got a bunch of boats in South Africa that are locally manufactured and people really enjoy sailing them. That's awesome. Something that has always baffled me with some clubs is that we restrict the types of boats we are allowing in our club. I can understand if you've got a small piece of water and you don't want multi-hulls on the water. That's understandable. But when you start saying we only accept lasers, GP14s, and fireballs, anyone else isn't welcome. Well, how's that growing sailing? What's that doing for sailing? It's killing sailing. It is turning people away from the sport. So someone made a mistake and he walked past his neighbor's house and he saw a really old, rotten, some or other boat there that's not on our list, and fixed it up, spent the time to fix it up, turns up at the club and gets told he can't sail there. We need to change that attitude. We need to make sure we accept any boat to sail. And if he wants to race, let him race. If we haven't got a PY rating and we don't know what it should be, make something up. You can look at a boat and make something up. We want to encourage people to become part of the sport we participate in. We don't want to have any barriers towards these people. Think of games. What games can we play? Something that is quite successful in a lot of places is, I don't know if it's the right terminology, but I'll call it canoe, kayak basketball. So it's almost like water polo, but with a hoop, and teams are in kayaks and they paddle around and pass the ball to each other and try and get the ball off each other and then have to throw it through the loop. Think of things like that. Treasure hunts. With adults, you can play drinking game treasure hunts where you put a clue onto a different marker buoy and people sail to that marker. They've got to read the clue, and if they get a dud, they've got to down a beer or something like that. Kids can do treasure hunts where they find the treasure. Whatever the case may be, think of games. Be creative. We are not in the days of just racing. We need to attract people to our sport. We need to attract people to enjoy our sport regularly. We are competing against sports that have been very creative in what they do. We're looking at indoor hockey and this futsal, I don't know what they call it here, but in these small cement courts, and video games and all this sort of thing where people have been very creative. We need to start being creative in our sport to attract people to the sport. Multi-activities, traditionally, we have focused just on sailing. We want, in our sailing club, we just want sailors there. But the trend in the world is towards multi-activities. Things like stand-up paddle boards, windsurfing and kiteboarding and swimming and volleyball on the beach, any activity that is going to get people to come down to the club or to the sailing school or center and participate in whatever's going on there. Yes, we want to keep sailing as the primary objective, but if it's blowing 1.5 knots, I know in the Vaal that's very often, that's really strong wind, but in a lot of places, if it's blowing 1.5 knots, geez, stand-up paddle boards is a much better idea than lying there burning in the sun and trying to get around a race course. Let's think about this. Let's think about what activities we can include in our sport that will grow our sport. Don't be threatened by other sports. Family. I really believe that family is something that is neglected in the modern day in sailing. We need to be focusing on getting families sailing. In the modern day, we have the breadwinners, both a husband and wife are generally working, and they're working long hours. So weekends are very precious. If we can show the world how sailing can cater to the family, really encourage people. It's the only sport where I can sail against my son on even terms and play against him. I'm not going to play rugby against his age group or even run a 100-meter sprint against him. I'll probably die. But I can sail against him and I can do well. Or I can get onto a small keeled boat with my whole family and sail against another family. I really believe family is a key that worldwide sailing is missing on this. And coming out of the lockdown, I think it is even more an area that people have been together a lot, and they understanding each other more, being locked in their houses together. So they will want to do more together. I think it's going to be a natural progression. Then looking at social, people want to socialize. They want to socialize in groups. So on and off the water social. So sailing's quite a social sport. If you chuck a bunch of people onto a keelboat and you're not too serious about the racing, even if you are serious about the racing, I know Royal Cape has been very successful with their Wednesday night racing. That's a social event that's attracting a lot of people. Think about how you can attract more people to that social event. I think sometimes the social part gets confused with a drinking party. When we say social, it's not necessarily, it can be, but it's not necessarily loud music and drinking. It can be just encouraging people to sit together and talk about their sport. And in doing films or presentations or promotional videos on the sport of sailing, just to get people to be together and talk about the sport more. Virtual regatta, I'm sure all of you have been involved or aware of virtual regatta. This has grown hugely during the lockdown phase because most sailors are now sailing virtually. I'm not a virtual sailor. If I want to kill somebody, I want to kill somebody. If I want to drive a racing car, I want to drive a racing car. And if I want to sail a boat, I'm going to sail a boat. But it is very attractive to a lot of people, and it's a good way to, especially during the lockdown, keep people engaged. You can, at an event where you're doing physical sailing, you can have a virtual regatta get together where everyone brings their tablets or their laptops or even their phones if they play on their phones, and sit around a room and play and race against each other after the on the water racing. So virtual regatta, which is supported by World Sailing, can be used as well in a recreational environment. Now looking at traditional versus modern, and I'm not, remember I gave this talk to the international market. It's not focused on South Africa, but I think in a lot of places we fall into the problem of traditional thinking. For a lot of us, we battle to take ourselves out of the way we've been doing things. And that is traditional thinking. The old traditional yacht clubs that's where sailing happens, from yacht clubs. Very often that's a closed thing. That's something that creates barriers. It's first you can't get into the yacht club. Then you're told what boat you're supposed to sail, and then you're told you can't sail because you haven't done bridge duty yet, and then you told, so all these barriers that come out of the traditional thing. I see it very strongly in the Caribbean, where there's a lot of traditional yacht clubs and traditional ways of doing things. We need to make sure we are not creating barriers. There are some good things that come out of the traditional way, but if it's creating a barrier to entry and a barrier to competition, to retention, then we shouldn't have it, or we should change it in some way or another. Obviously, this total racing orientated environment is a negative one. As I said, most people in the sport are recreational sailors, and they're going to always be recreational sailors. Our elite races are going to be minimal. So if we are taking kids, we just get them to sail, to learn where the wind's coming from, and we immediately want them to race around a triangular course. Why? They're going to learn a lot more about their boats if they go and sail around and enjoy playing on their boat, standing on their boat, fishing off their boat, diving off their boat, whatever the case may be. They're going to learn a lot about the balance on that boat, what makes the boat go. But we have this drive to get people racing. It's not necessary. We can retain people through recreation. not necessarily racing always, but also other types of recreational sailing. Optimist, I've spoken enough about the optimist thing. The optimist plays a very important role in worldwide sailing and development of sailors, but it also is the culprit for putting the most people off sailing. So we need to be very careful of how we use the optimist structure. We are driving so about optimist Africans and then optimist world championships. That's why most of the kids are sailing optimists, which is wrong. Kids should be sailing optimists because they want to get out there and enjoy the boat on the water. That's what it must be about. A lot of our sailing is club-based. That's a very traditional way of doing the sailing. The kiteboards and windsurfers have broken away completely from this, and they look where the wind is and where the waves are, and that's where they go and take part in the sport. The club's an important part of our structure, and I believe it should remain, but I don't think we need to protect it. If we are creating the right activities at the clubs will grow. But what's wrong with someone launching off a beach and going to sail, or launching off the beach and teaching someone to sail? I don't see anything wrong with that. If they're not part of the club, we need to be growing the sport of sailing, and then the clubs will automatically grow. Let's not be so focused on growing our clubs that we kill the sport of sailing. I do believe that club racing plays an important role, and with the people who are sailing already, because if you are just sailing the competitions, if our calendar's too big and everyone's sailing the competitions, the clubs do not get the benefit from those people who want to race club racing. They end up sailing in competitions and the club dies. So we need to manage the amount of competition that's around the place so that our sailors do sail at the clubs. But don't make the club the only place and the whole drive is all about saving this club. We need to be looking at saving sailing. And then the saving of the club will happen automatically. Training to race, I've spoken enough about. We just focus on training the race. And then we're very focused on children and teaching children to sail. But there's a huge market out there of adults and retired people, all sorts of people who we can teach to sail. And if we are thinking in the modern way of more recreational sailing, there's more market for this, because we wanted children to learn to sail correctly so that they can become good racers. We want adults to get into the sport, to enjoy the sport. So we need to start letting our sailing schools change so that they are catering for more adults. Get the parents involved, get the granny and grandpa involved. Retired people have a lot more time than most people. Get them sailing, have specific training weekends for retired people. That's going to grow our sport. So think of how you can overcome that. Now, here I've spoken about modern, but I've already covered a lot of this, so I'll go through it quite quickly. Recreation and health. This is a developing thing. More people are worried about what they eat, how they eat it, when they eat it, and how they stay fit, and all different health things like yoga and all this sort of thing. That's the modern trend. We need to embrace that. We need to think, how can sailing be attractive to the fitness freak? How can sailing be attractive to the person who wants to stay healthy? It's a healthy sport, but we're not marketing as a healthy sport. We're not marketing to that market. So we need to think of recreation and health, how we market to that. We need to get more fun involved. I don't know if any of you have seen the Open BIC unregatta. If you Google it, it's the UN unregatta. Amazing stuff. These kids have an absolute blast on these open bics. They're called open skiffs now, but I think if you Google Open BIC Fun Unregatta, you'll find it. And they do all sorts of funny things like freestyling. So you've got to do pull tricks on the boat. So like climbing up the mast and doing a star off the mast, or backflips off the boat or something like that. And then on the race course, they have a bridge where you've got to, it's too low for the mast to go under. So you've got to heel the boat over and sail under it and then right the boat. You go around, you've got to capsize some places and right the boat, and then you can only sail on. So bringing more fun into it. This helps people understand their boat and enjoy their boats, and it brings more investment in. Simple equipment, that's the modern trend, is towards simpler equipment. The days of the Flying Dutchman with its 3,000 million lines in there that you can tweak every part of the boat while you're sailing, generally that's gone. There's a few people who want to do that, but people don't have the time to learn that anymore. They want to get onto a boat that's simple and quick and easy to sail. On that line, I'll talk about microwave sailing. People want to get there quickly, get on quickly, have their sail, have their fun, get off and get home, because time is at a premium. So like you go to Woolies and you buy yourself a pre-cooked meal, you stick it in the microwave and 5 minutes later you're eating. You're not spending 3 hours preparing to eat anymore. You're just sticking it in for 5 minutes and then you're eating. So microwave sailing is what we got to think about. Remember, I don't care what the traditional is. I don't care what the racing is. That's going to happen with the people who want to do it. But we're not marketing to the other people at the moment. We need to do that. Different competition formats we want to look at. We've seen this in the GP series and America's Cup, and team racing's becoming bigger, match racing. Look at all different competition formats of how we can race without putting too much pressure on. Make it accessible to all. Again, we want as many people to come and learn to sail and to come and sail and enjoy their boats or enjoy club boats as possible. Encourage people to get there. Take away the barriers. Festival of Sailing, the Round the Island race has been very successful at this, creating the festival around the sailing. So an area we haven't looked at is things like showing off my boat that I've done extra pumping to, or whatever the case may be, and all sorts of things that go around a festival. Just that it doesn't just go about the racing. Create festivals of sailing rather than regattas. We still want the regattas, but you can add festivals of sailing, and you can include regattas within the festival, but encourage people to have fun with their boats, bring their boats to show them off. And then I've spoken about family, but I'll mention it again because I think it is very important in the modern day. Other areas we need to look at, and I know some traditionalists have a problem here, but yes, all these wind sports are sailing. They're using the wind to sail. Let's embrace it. Let's make them part of us. So like kiteboarding, it's now in the Olympics as an Olympic sport. It's probably in the near future going to become part of the youth worlds. It's going to be part of the Youth Olympic Games. It's becoming a very big part of world sailing. We need to embrace that. Boards, windsurf boards. The new Olympic board is the yeah, okay, I'll get back to that. But it's a foiling board. And we need to realize that a lot of people, this is the cheapest way to foil. And a lot of people are going to want to take this up. It creates opportunity. It's going to draw the people towards foiling and towards sailing. It's the IQ foil, which is the board for the Olympics in Paris. It's possibly going to be part of the Youth Olympic Games. I can see that very soon it'll possibly be part of the Youth Worlds. It's a development pathway. It's a really fun and easy thing to do with the IQ foil. The boards have changed in such a way that it's much easier to do, and it's probably the most accessible form of foiling. The wing, I've seen at Mac, they're really getting ahead of the game with the wing foiling. Brilliant, easy entry. Let's incorporate that in yachting and sailing. Let's make that part of what we do. Keelboats and yachts, very important. It's I don't have to tell the Cape people about how successful the Wednesday night racing is. That's what keelboats and yachts is all about, getting new people into the sport. Foiling I've spoken about, it's becoming more accessible. There's a lot more boats that are easier to foil that are coming out. They're still very expensive for South Africa, but they are becoming more accessible. So think of foiling, it's what a lot of people want to do. I don't believe it's going to become the only sort of sailing way, but it is going to be there for a long time. Think of race officials, people who want to get involved in sailing, but don't really want to get on the boat and actually sail. Maybe they want to become race officials. Think of how you can create that pathway. In the pathways, we talk a bit more about race officials. Then I believe every club and every federation should have a creative manager. How can we be creative in our sport of sailing? How can we creatively develop sailing in our country? We need someone who's specifically thinking about this. And I'm sorry, guys, but I'm out of this category, because if this person is over 35 years old, they're too old. We need young people thinking of new things and thinking how they can make it. Careers, we need to be advertising careers. There are millions of careers in sailing that are related to sailing. Huge opportunity. We need to be showing this, and I'll speak more about that again in the Pathways talk. So Pathways, as I say, this will be the next session, which is in 2 weeks' time, and we will talk about racing pathways, important, coach pathways, instructor pathways. Now, the difference between a coach and an instructor teaches people to sail, a coach coaches them to sail better. Race officials, administrators, recreational pathways, looking at how we get people more into recreation, and then career pathways. All very important, but that's for next time. So in summary, I quote Albert Einstein, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I see this worldwide, especially in developing countries. They do the same thing over and over and complain that their sport is not growing. We need to change to grow. We need to take risks to grow. Then our sport will grow. But most importantly, we need to create access and encourage people to sail, take away the barriers. Whoops, so that's me. Thank you very much. And now we'll take some comments and questions if anybody wants. Please remember to stick them into the chat if you've got any questions.
Thanks, Rob. So I think I'll go first. For me, I'd just like to know how do other countries keep their professionals after a tournament? Because I'm trying to understand what incentives it could have or benefits in that regard when it's a normal Tuesday and they go out sailing. So I just want to understand that.
So Malusi, I presume you're talking about after they've competed at the top level, keeping them in the sport. Is that correct?
That's correct, as well as perhaps even between competitions, as you said, maybe they only train when a competition comes, but in between they're not doing anything. Yeah.
Okay, so firstly, in countries like the UK, they've really realized there's a problem with these top level sailors that are falling coming out of the sport and becoming depressed and that. So they're creating career pathways, and before they leave the sport or stop sailing at that high level, they are helping them get into their careers. And a lot of these people, most of them in the UK are professionals. They've got a degree, but they've never practiced that degree, and now suddenly they're 35 years old and they've got to go into the workplace. So they are helping them start changing their thinking into how to channel into the workplace, and then focusing also on a lot of them becoming top level coaches and developing in the sport, sports science and that sort of thing. So they're basically helping them create career pathways. That's where the people who come out the top of high level competition and getting in there. On your other question, we've got to create a culture. Most of it's a changing thing, but in the UK, there's a culture. If I am a high-level competitive sailor, I'm training on, I'm training at least 25 hours a week if I'm at school. If I'm over that, I'm training. If I'm in the UK squad, I'm training basically 6 to 8 hours every day. Not necessarily on the water all that time, but I'm training that time. So it's a culture that we don't have, and a lot of emerging countries don't have, that you can win without training. And it is part of the nature of what has happened in emerging countries. Your fleets are small, so your sailors do not, they win too easily. And because they win that easily, they don't think they have to train. The RYA has a pathway that has training groups in it. The US has a pathway where they have training groups in it. France has pathways where they have training groups in it. So it's creating a culture of training amongst a group. Get a group of youngsters together from Joburg and get them talking regularly and encouraging each other to go sailing. Then when they get to the top level, they will go sailing, they will train more. But we also, there's a lot of management of what training is done. So I've seen a lot of guys in emerging countries, they jump on the water and they, in their laser, and they reach up and down for 2 hours and they come off, oh, that was awesome, I trained for 2 hours. No, you didn't. You reached, which you do very little of in racing. So they need to have guidelines. Coaching is also another way. We do not have professional coaches due to the nature of our structures. In a lot of countries that where the structure is very strong, they have coaches in every club, and those coaches are permanently there. So if I'm part of a squad, I can go down to the club at any stage, and the coach is there to assist me to train. So that can help a lot. We need to look how we can develop coaches being available to our top level sailors to train. And that will help in directing the youngsters to get into a culture of training rather than competing.
Thanks, Rob. Very informative. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question?
Melusi, Andrew Collins here. Just some comments. That's really interesting. I mean, this is something that I spend a lot of my time trying to work out how to get more people sailing. I'm just, for those who don't know me, I'm from Royal Cape Yacht Club. One of the things we're facing is we've got sort of a group of 25, 30 boats that race quite regularly, but we have 400 boats on the moorings, and we're always asking ourselves, how do we get more of those guys out on the water? When we look at the successful events which get 60, 70 boats on the water, they tend to be ones where there are much longer courses. For instance, round Robben Island, Portugal Day, where we set a sort of a long course. The Mykonos race is a big one. People don't seem to want to do windward. The average sailor doesn't want to do windward leeward racing. That's very much the territory of the Cape 31s. That's their thing. And the other side, so we're pushing the cruising side quite hard. We've been very fortunate recently in getting the right person who's enthusiastic, who's got good ideas, and he makes stuff happen. One of the most successful cruising events we've had has been a moonlight regatta thing, where we sail across to Robben Island, 3 different courses. You braai at the island, then you do a pursuit race to the waterfront. There we do a whiskey tasting at the Bascule bar, and then there's a motor race back to the club, and a final sprint finish to the bar. And that seems to have been quite successful. It was kind of what you were talking about, trying to find these multi-activity things. So that we found worked really, really well. And then just another comment on, I've got 2 14-year-old sons, one who's decided to sail finally, after many years of being exposed to sailing. And what was interesting for me was he completely skipped the Optimist. It had no interest for him whatsoever. It was slow, filled up with water. It was boring. As soon as he was big enough to sail a boat that was a bit faster, 420, and now he's got a laser, suddenly sailing appealed. And I think the other big thing that made the difference for him was being able to sail with friends. Kids, it's all about their friendships, and if you don't have that, it seems to be quite difficult to get them involved.
Andrew, thank you. That's some very, very good comments. And I think the friendship thing is something that really is very important. I talk a bit about that when I talk about women and girls, because women and girls are very gregarious, more so than men. But the friendship of youngsters at sailing venues, and maybe we need to find ways of getting more groups of guys together to enjoy the sport, rather than focusing. The world has tended towards single-handed boats, through the Optimist to the laser, and that doesn't allow so much for the friendship development. And I think we need to really look at how we can get more groups together and friendships. And really exciting your ideas at Royal Cape with a cruising type of racing. I think that's brilliant. So well done.
The other thing that has worked exceptionally well, and Malusi knows well because he's been part of it, is our double-handed racing. So although it's, again, not that many people, what does happen is after our double-handed racing, we set up a long table on the deck at the club. And let's say you've had 20 boats taking part, you've got 40 sailors, and we put all 40 people around one table. And it allows everyone to chat to each other and get to know each other. And it introduces you to people that you might not have said hello to at the club otherwise. And we found that that's a great way to get people involved and to sort of make the circle bigger, as it were.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, no, definitely. The social events after the double-handed does really add more to it. Just I have a question or a comment from Vernon, who says our club halves the fees for young adults, seems to work for a while. I think I don't know if this is in response to Andrew or Francois from MAC, who asked how we can retain teenagers and young adults. Rob, maybe you want to chime in there?
Yes. So I think more importantly than making it cheaper, we need to make it attractive. And to be honest, most of our clubs are not very attractive to teenagers. There's in some clubs old farts who think they own the place, and they possibly do. They've spent years building the place and they have an entitlement, but that entitlement ends up pushing kids away, because you're not allowed to go here and you can't sit there and you can't do this, and everything's so stiff. And we need to think. I'm not saying go totally to what the kids are looking for, because we've got to keep a form of discipline and a form of order. But maybe we need to look at our clubs and see how can we make our clubhouses and our club foreshores and environments more attractive to the youngsters. Kids spend hours sitting with their phones and in a group, and they're not chatting to only each other, they're chatting to the whole world while they're chatting to each other. And I'm personally someone who battled to get to grips with this, because if you're sitting in company, you don't talk on your bloody phone, you know. But this is what the kids do nowadays. So maybe we must start accommodating that and creating chill zones and social areas where the kids can get together and enjoy themselves, and then do a bit of sailing as well. You know, sometimes I think we get so desperate to get them sailing that we throw them away. And if we had areas where they can enjoy this and just enjoy themselves and chill out and do a bit of sailing, we will grow the sailing. So yeah, I believe fees can be an issue. So halving the fees for the youngsters. But I think if the youngsters come into an environment where they're not feeling welcome, then it doesn't matter what the fees are. We're not going to keep them.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think if they're willing to post pictures of the food they just bought, I think they would be willing to post pictures of yachts. Um, so Donovan says, just following Vernon's comments, there's typically a drop after youth nationals when the kids have aged out. It's vital to get the university kids involved in clubs. They can also be mentors for teenagers as well. So is there a way how we can make things attractive for universities, maybe?
I think again, and I deal with this a bit in the pathways talk, because we don't have clear pathways. We don't tell these guys, once you've aged out of youth events, there's been this drive to go to youth worlds and everything, and now suddenly there's nothing. We need to highlight the potential to go to world championships, any world championships. We need to highlight the potential to really have fun on your boat. And show them what the next steps are, out of dinghies into keelboats. You know, what's that pathway? Is that pathway highlighted? Is it accessible for kids? So I think a lot goes about telling them what the next step is. And university sailing, we need to develop the university sailing in a way that when a kid comes out of there, we can't just expect them to go to university and keep sailing. We need to say to them, listen, when you go to university, there's a sailing club there that is awesome, and you're going to take part in these events, and that's how you're going to do it. We need to show that pathway and make it available. I think that's a key.
Thanks, Rob. So I just wanted to ask if Ed would like to kind of also say something in regards to the universities, as your driver behind the increase in this area at the moment.
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. Look, the university scene is quite active, but it is a problem to get them involved with the clubs. And to be frank, many of them get scared off by politics. I mean, it's a very active interclub scene with, I think, pretty much every major university, and we've got a couple of the non-traditional universities starting up their own clubs as well. I mean, I think last year there were 6 intervarsity events across the country. So it's an active scene. It's just, how do you get them sucked into the clubs? Because many of them get scared off by politics. In some cases, the clubs really take them in open-armed. Stillby is one of those. LDYC works well with them. And other cases, they're a bit on the side. But that does seem to be improving at the moment. But it's always just that problem, getting them straight out of school into the clubs. Because the university clubs have been there for ages, but I don't know, it's quite a drag to get the kids in. Once they're in, they're there for the entire university scene. And some of them seem to get stuck there for extended periods. But yeah, it's just that from high school to university move over that we need to smooth.
All right, thanks, Ed. That was very insightful. So there's a few comments in there, guys, if you'd like to ask, if you'd like to check that out. In terms of questions, if anyone has a question, you're welcome to unmute your mic and ask away.
Malusi, I'd just like to pick up on Neil's comment here on we need to keep it fun for everyone, and what is fun for 60-year-olds is not necessarily fun for 16-year-olds. We need to remember the 60-year-old, the 80-year-old, that's a very important person to us, and the 16-year-old and the 12-year-old and the families. We need to create opportunity for everybody. I think the biggest fault most countries are making in the emerging areas, and South Africa's there, is that we just let this happen. We don't work at creating things for the youngsters, for the older people. I mean, bingo at a club is great, you know, but then what's the 16-year-old doing? But remember, it's across the spectrum. And believe it or not, some 60-year-olds would love to clap a 14-year-old on a laser. That happens, and they want to do it. So we need to consider everybody, and I think that's a very important point.
Just Rob, if I may just talk a bit more around that. What I was trying to say is that I think we need to speak a different language to each group of people. I think for too long we've tried to speak the same language to everybody, and that doesn't work. We need to speak a different language, and certainly we have found that kids teach kids better. So when it comes to teaching kids, get the kids to do it. When it comes to teaching 60-year-olds, get old farts like me doing it. And so on and so forth. Because kids understand kids. They understand the lingo that they all use, and they can relate to that. And similarly, an old fart is not going to want to be taught by a 14-year-old. So I think it's very, very important that we speak a different language to each group. I know I was reading a story not so long ago about one of the Australian clubs who put together a camp for girls. And it was around Valentine's Day. And they had all female instructors, and only girls attended this camp. And I think they had 40-odd females attending the camp, which was more than they'd ever had on any other camp, whether it was females, guys, or mixed. And it just goes to show that different people we need to speak to and handle differently. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. I think also definitely hit something there. I think for myself as well, doing double-handed, I find that I can learn the most from my double-handed partner is John Waller. I think, yeah. So for me also, just finding that bridge between the 60-year-old and the 16 to pass on that knowledge is also something that needs to be looked at, because I don't think I would have learned most of the things that I have now through just textbooks and just being out there. I think certain things can only be passed down by experiencing them over a long space of time. So also that bridge between the 16 and the 60-year-old also needs to be built there. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Melusi, I think you touch on something important there, is the mentoring aspect, and I'll never forget Dave Hudson told me a story of what was in Point Yacht Club, I think with cadets, if I'm not mistaken. And the first was you come in and you don't know anything, and you get put onto a boat with a skipper that knows that can sail pretty well. And then you graduate to being that skipper, and that skipper graduates to Sunday racing, where he actually cruise for an adult who's racing seriously, and that's the progression. And it goes about mentoring. The kid's mentoring the other kid, then the adult is mentoring that kid. And I think programs like that can be very effective. But it's a written down pathway. They say, this is what you're going to do next. You're working towards this, and there's the next thing. And I think so often we just let things happen rather than creating that necessary pathway. So that's mentoring. You're talking about getting on with someone who knows their stuff and learning from them.
Vernon says he strongly believes that should have club open days for entire families to bring to come over on the weekend and really participate in the sports. Are there any examples you can share about open families that have been successful?
Melusi, yeah, it was something that we tried in the northern region to have open days for our clubs with relative success. More importantly, normally clubs are closed. You know, you have to be a member, pay visitors fees for the weekend, camping fees, all that type of jazz. What we did notice is if you open it up totally, families will bring their families and their kids, etc., etc. And what I have noticed at SYC, and Donovan can comment on this, is that you've seen a big spike in families joining the club. I I mean, I went to the dam on Sunday just to keep an eye and make sure my boats were okay. The amount of kids that were around on their bicycles and having a ride was actually amazing. So it definitely does work. So you should try it. I believe you should.
Thanks, Vernon. If there's anyone else who'd like to ask a question, please feel free.
Yeah, if you can hear me well here, I'm not sure. But so one of the things that I experienced in the UK and Europe with sailing is that it's extremely, there's a huge contingent around companies and companies competing between each others, and what they effectively do is sponsor a boat for a year or however long. But it becomes a prestige thing. It becomes very important. And what happens is within the companies, people are expected to get involved in certain sports, and sailing being one of the big ones. And it becomes a prestige within the company. So you have companies with competing with each other. And then you have obviously people getting involved in it who perhaps wouldn't normally within the companies. And that's a really good way to get new employees, young adults, and then anybody obviously working in the companies. So what are we doing about that? Because I don't actually know, or I haven't seen a lot about that where companies are getting involved in the South African sailing scene.
I think that's a question for SAS, but I think it's a very good point, and I think it can be a club thing that the clubs with, especially like on the Vaal, it's quite difficult because you're so far away from the environment, but it can be done there, and I think it's something that maybe needs to be driven by SAS and encouraged, because you get that company executive in. He's the guy who can afford boats. He's the guy who can afford to let his kids sail, and we grow the sport that way. So I think very good point. And I don't know if SAS has plans or any ideas on maybe marketing that way.
Maybe Vernon, you could speak more to this, but the Team Sailing League, SAS has got the Team Sailing League in place. I'll hand to you, Vernon.
Yeah, Grant, we have got the Team Sailing League set up for exactly that. We've showcased it and encouraged companies to take over the team sailing boats. At this moment in time, there hasn't been a great insurgence of companies getting involved. We have had a couple of successes in up in the northern region. So the equipment is there to be used. Another thing that we're also working quite hard with is to get our Section 18A sorted out, where companies can obviously offer sponsorship, and that I think that would progressively lead on to what Loring's idea is. Loring, it's a great idea, and I think us as SAS, we will start looking into that with a little bit more depth. Thank you very much.
Vernon, maybe you could just share a bit about the vision of the Team Sailing League, how it operates, how many boats there are, what's happening. I think a lot of people are very vague on that.
So, Vernon, before you go on, I don't really want to get too off track. We can definitely share that information with everyone. We will be sending out communication, so all the questions asked will be answered further in the communication. But definitely, Vernon, if you can just add like a summary in regards to that.
The equipment is available. There's a full plan that I will get sent on to all of the people that have actually partaken in the Zoom meeting. It has been advertised on the newsletters too. I do encourage all of the Commodores and club past champions to read the newsletter and get involved. There's also a wealth of information on the website. But having said that, yes, I will distribute something. Thank you.
Thanks. You'll definitely talk about that. So Andrew asked that they're successful at getting young Black kids to sail at RCYC. How would they get older Black people to sail? Rob, is there anything you've seen around the world that works?
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult one, and I don't think it's something we should look around the world so much, because it's a very South African related issue. And I mean, Melissa, you're more qualified because you understand the culture more than me. But what I've seen, it is going to be a challenge to get the middle-aged and older Black people in this country to sail, because they come from a very different cultural background, and I think there's more success going to be there if we focus at the youngsters. But there's a very big Black emerging middle and upper class and business owners. So this the business league that Loring's talking about, and I saw he mentioned the L26s, and I think that's an awesome. A keelboat is ideal for that, and I think that's going to probably be the most successful area that you can get Black businessmen involved in the sport. Whether they're going to buy a boat or skipper a boat, helm a boat, I don't know. But I do believe that a business league would be a good place to start, from my personal opinion. So that's not based on any other countries, but I think we have a unique situation in South Africa.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah. Sorry, Andrew, I don't think I can add much to that. So I think I'm an odd egg, as my friends have told me, because I tell them I sail. So it's difficult to really answer. But I think for my age group, probably 30 and under, I think it will be, I think prospects of, I don't know, I don't want to use prosperity, but in a sense of creating stakeholders, bringing in stakeholders of color, to be able to then kind of trickle onto their friends and then onto other people in their circle. But right now, I don't have anything in regards to that. Does anyone want to ask a final question before we end the session?
Malusi, I just want to come in and say, guys, sailing in South Africa has huge potential. I think we're tapping 0.0001% of the market or that. And we just need to work together at finding ways. And I think this forum to discuss, not what I'm presenting, but what everybody here can discuss and talk to each other about. This, it's not SAS's job necessarily. SAS needs to take ideas from this group and take them forwards. But it's up to us in this group to make things happen and to change things. And we have an opportunity to change things, and we need to take the bull by the horns and make things happen in the country.
Thanks, Rob. So just in closing, thank you everyone for joining. This was part 2 of 4. So in 2 weeks, we'll be having Pathways, if I'm not mistaken. And sorry. So you can reach us on, there's the contact details. If you have any further questions, you can definitely email us and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. And with that, please stay safe, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.